Hi there, it's Marcus Bussey here from the Uni of the Sunshine Coast in Australia. Very honoured to join you. I'm very happy to have been invited by Art and the gang. So I'm going to move quickly, because we don't have much time for these recordings, into sort of where I'm at in thinking about what COVID can teach us, offering us a pedagogy for rebalancing. Well, what does that mean? Okay, so as an environmental historian, amongst other things, I'm very much aware of the embedded nature of human culture, human being and existence, in actual fact, in networks of communities. And so the microbial community, the viral community that obviously COVID has made us painfully aware of, is one community that in modern educational terms has been largely overlooked. So I want to suggest that we inhabit a relational universe. If we take that as our starting point, then immediately what we're doing with education now currently, especially pre-COVID, in some senses doesn't make any sense. So we've been educating in a sense with the wrong understanding of what a human being is or potentially could be. So education, of course, therefore is contextual and is driven by specific needs, the needs of the state, the needs of industry, and so on. We all accept that. It's a no-brainer. Learning, of course, is something slightly different from education. Learning is something that's an ongoing thing, but still it's culturally and psychologically determined. And it's a process of ongoing becoming as we keep learning and learning. Should be no end in sight. Of course, we tend to fall into comfort zones where we learn what we want to learn. In other words, we reinstate default patterns, you might say, where learning is a bit like living in a bubble where we learn what we want to learn. Yes, that's why this is so, because as I said all my life, this is why it's so. Those sorts of weird circular things that seems to mock learning in a sense by pretending to be learning, whereas actually we're just reinstating assumptions and beliefs that can be quite detrimental to, I guess, our overall thriving in a global microbial and interrelated relational community. Okay, so I want to take the virus as teacher for an educational ecosystem. So what does it mean to be part of an ecosystem? Well, the rest of this short presentation will explore some of what it means to me, because of course we're all thinking our way through, practicing our way through this COVID period. So, all right. So I want to start my thinking with two comments actually from a friend of mine, Steph Fischel, who I'm lucky enough to work with. She's a wonderful thinker, and she makes this point in her book, The Microbial State. The planet demands more from us than the unexamined ideas of human mastery over nature that shut out other kinds of relations with both ourselves and with other beings. Okay, now she's talking from an IR perspective, but this is an insight that I think we can take on very easily in our educational context as well. We've been educating with the assumption of human mastery, that we can master informational systems, knowledge systems and disciplines and so on. And it kind of worked for a long time, but it's become more and more threadbare, I would have to say, over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And it's always been under attack from other, probably you could say the Romantic period, thinkers of Rousseau and so on, for a number of centuries. But essentially it's been the hegemonic view of human mastery. But she's saying, no, in a world of increasingly assertive relations, in other words, climate change, the breakdown of, state systems of governance that lead to the spread of not just viruses, but also to the spread of, displaced people and so on. We're entering a whole new, and have been for, over a decade or more, perhaps even from 9/11 on, a whole new world of painful reminders and awakenings to our relational nature. So then she goes on to say, talking from she's offering us a Euro-patriarchal anthropocentric critique, a feminist critique, and a relational critique too. She says these Euro-patriarchal anthropocentric tendencies, scholars, and I would have to say teachers, and perhaps those of us who are called global citizenry more broadly, must be able to shift perceptions between the small and the large, from microbes to the biosphere, and be able to switch lenses from the view of the human to that of the non-human. How do we educate for this? It's easy to say, okay, COVID has sped up our movement to educational provision online and so on, and we've got all the technologies, and aren't we clever for managing this shift and so on relatively seamlessly, though both teachers, educators and the students have often been dragged screaming to the altar, one might say. But that's not really what we're interested in here. We're interested in actually a shift in our understanding of what it means to be human, because education itself is premised on certain models of what it means to be human. So, the human as the tabula rasa, the child born as a blank slate and then we fill it up sort of thing. These are models that, even though of course we can scoff and laugh and say how passé is that, but they're still, many of them are models or metaphors for thinking about people and thinking about the job of teachers who pour information into a space inhabited by students who, for better or worse, will manage that information or not. Okay. So what do I want to say here then? Well, COVID invites and challenges us to educate relationally. Okay, moving from a two-dimensional epistemology of mastery to the three-dimensional, in which interbeing, it's a term I've used from Thich Nhat Hanh, 1986. I first heard him use it. It's a wonderful term. We interbeing. So we're moving to the three-dimensional, in which interbeing is key to meaning-making and a whole new story for education, but for humanity and, the humanity as embedded humanity, relational humanity, not the mastery humanity. So where do we go from here? Well, I'm turning to young people now. Phoebe Tickle is a member of a online community called the Moral Imaginings, plural. And they've been running a very interesting process for about 18 months now, or maybe longer. I could be wrong. So there's a link there. You can click on that because I'll share the PowerPoint as well. And you can go to the blog where I took this. But she's points out, and she's sort of speaking for her community. It's a bit like a Moral Imaginings manifesto. She makes this point. Most people are living a life that is a shadow. We've heard this before, right? Or a small segment of life that they could be. But by that, we don't mean that we could be living more in terms of material wealth. We're talking about the kind of life many of us imagined when we were younger. One in which it is rich with meaning and builds itself around what is important or even sacred. And I like this image. If we have been living through the great flattening, then we need now is a great unflattening. Charles Eisenstein, in his terrific book Climate, goes on and builds on this. He sort of expands on this. And I know I shouldn't be reading off these things, but the words are so important that I want to actually stay true to them. It helps me with my logic anyway. A shift in mythology is more than a cognitive shift. So the great unflattening requires a shift in mythology, in imagining. The name I like to use for this news story is from Thich Nhat Hanh's term, yes, interbeing. Interbeing must be more than a philosophical concept if anything is going to change. It must be a way of seeing, a way of being, a strategic principle, and most of all, a felt reality. When we restore the internal ecosystem, the fullness of our capacity to feel and to love, only then will there be hope of restoring the outer. The ecological crisis is making or asking for a revolution of love. So love is the relational glue, the sticky stuff that holds this new story together. If we don't have a love for the relational messiness of our world, if we don't feel connected to the microbial state, to the viral processes, to the ecological, to the green, to the living, to the feathered, to the warm and the cold-blooded, and so on, it's very hard for us to move cognitively into that space without falling back into older patterns. So this revolution of interbeing is something that's really it's requiring of us. That's the better way. It's requiring of us, inviting us to change how we do the primary things that sustain our societies, one of which, of course, is education. Another one would be economics as well, of course, and politics for that matter too. So a couple more points that I want to make. So reigniting the pedagogical imagination starts with a recognition that we are much more than we've ever dreamed of. And this is a conclusion that came to the other day when I was working with a group from the Montessori school. But I'm also involved with the neo-humanist school, a yogic-based school run on the principles of neo-humanism, inspired by Ananda Marga and its founder, Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar. So I've had these multiple connections coming in from all over the place, all saying the same thing, that, to paraphrase Walt Whitman, that we are multitudes. We are not isolated individuals, but we are relational individuals in a relational network and nexus. So this realization invites us to rework our critical pedagogical projects of the 20th century. Our critical spirituality is much more resonant for me. It's inviting us to see what Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar called a neo-humanist commitment to a relational pedagogy that addresses purpose from the perspective of socio-spiritual praxis. Okay, in other words, it's not society, it's not spiritual. Its spirituality has got nothing to do with floating off and sitting on a mountaintop in the Himalayas. It's about living the relational, being sensitive to it, and the critical is about being aware of how our practices impact on the relational quality that underpins our socio-ecological world. And that, to me, is where we start educating from. So we can take the principle that education is that which liberates, but what does it liberate us from? So it liberates us from small visions of self and other, limited visions. It liberates us from the focus on information management. It moves much more to purpose and meaning making. It liberates us from utilitarian, diminished meanings of what it means to be human. And it liberates us from fear. This leads me to the last point I want to make in this short presentation. Another friend of mine, a colleague, Professor Suhail Inayatullah, in a very recent piece, he's observed that what we're experiencing now is a renaissance of self and society that links the European Renaissance with the axial age. That is an explosion of inner and outer creativity. So new immersive AI, robotics, IoT, sensing technologies and so on, new discoveries from space, new inner meditation discoveries are all pointing to a massive disruption, or a series of disruptions in which what we know, how we know it, and who we can become are all up for grabs. And that's very exciting. So a post-COVID world, if there can ever be such a thing, because viruses generally don't go away, and as a historian I can say that's true of the flu, and prior to that the major epidemics, including the Black Death of the European and the whole of the Eurasian period from the 15th century on, 14th and 15th should I say. Where are we going to go? Well, I think that's up to us. I think we have to find the courage to commit to a new story. I think we need to find and draw upon the moral imagination and the pedagogical imagination that will respond to this new crisis, to this new world order in which not just COVID is reminding us that we're all connected, but so is the climate itself. And so I think other political, economic, and globalizing forces that are now turning the logic of neoliberalism, for instance, and capitalism as we know it on its head. I think there are other ways to perform a green capitalism, perhaps, but that's another whole question, isn't it? Another whole discussion. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure presenting these few ideas to you now.